Ladies, welcome to it is 9/19. Happens to be my wife's birthday.
Happy birthday to
And
her.
I'm sure I will let her know. This is we're starting week 4 of business communications. Sorry for the coughing. So this is our last week. We've got what, 6.5 days to get everything caught up and done. So, if you need help, if you need me for anything, if you have any questions, this week is the time, because next Monday you'll be starting another class. Some of us accounting principles, which is their last class, and then I will let her know at least. Yep, she's 29 again. I don't know how that happens.
It's a woman thing.
Yeah. Well, obviously in June, I told everybody I celebrated the 22nd anniversary of my 29th birthday. So
my sister
Nice.
celebrates anniversary. She doesn't have birthdays.
So if you need help, if you have any questions, this week is the time, because like I said, next Monday you're gonna be starting another class, and you don't want to be trying to fit, every once in a while, if you're really in a bind, I can give an extra day or two, like Monday and Tuesday. But you do not want to be trying to do 2 classes at once, because that is real pain.
Oh, yes.
So, and that sounds like Violet's speaking of experience. Well,
Mhm.
part of our requirements said to us by Dr. Kirk was
I
because of
actually have a question for you, Mr. Diamond.
Yes, ma'am.
With how far I am into the course now, would I be given, like, say I don't get caught up and I basically keep the F that I have right now due to the no grades being in, what would happen? Would I be dropped from the course, or would I get a second chance to redo the class?
You would have to redo the class, but you have to pay for the redo.
But I would have to pay for the redo. Okay,
Yeah,
that's understandable.
And I always tell people these classes are way too expensive to pay for them twice.
Yeah.
So
Same.
if you can get
Amen.
if you can get caught up, do your best. And
Yeah,
if not,
I moved out of a very toxic roommate arrangement and into a really nice, peaceful one. And they're all like making sure I'm like caught up on. Will you hush for a second? Like, I've been doing nonstop schoolwork for 2 days straight.
Well, all right, yeah, just do your best. We'll just keep in touch with me. We'll work together, and whatever I can do to help, I will. So where was I at? Oh, Constitution. So Constitution Day was September 17th. The school has told us we have to do stuff on that, which is great for me because I'm a huge constitutional nerd, and so I can go on and on forever. So I will try to make this as quick and painless as possible. And first off, we have like a 5-minute video, so I'm going to go ahead and share that on my screen. And this is just pretty much a basic civics lesson, not much more complicated than you would see in a middle school civics class. And it just kind of give us a refresher. I don't know how many people remember civics class and kind of the basics of the U.S. government. So here we go.
The U.S. Constitution is divided into a preamble and 7 sections or articles of various length. The preamble begins with "We the people" and states the following 5 goals for the Constitution: to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity.
Steve, you're muted.
I said, sorry, thank you. If you notice, he skipped provide for the common defense, and he never says why on that, so I'm not sure. That is one of the most important. They're responsible for That gives them the responsibility for the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, border security, things of that nature. And then when they say the general welfare, they don't mean like a check every month. They mean, so we have to take into account that this was in the 1700s, and language was completely different. Even English language. If you were to go back, here's a weird thing. If you were to travel back in time, let's say 500 years, and end up in an English speaking country like England or America, the English they spoke would be almost unrecognizable to you.
Yeah.
So just because you think you could travel back in time and you speak English, they speak English. Nope, not so much.
Significantly, Article 1, the lengthiest article of the Constitution, addresses the legislative branch, indicating the importance the framers placed on Congress. Article 1 divides the legislature into the House of Representatives and the Senate and sets the terms of office for members at 2 and 6 years, respectively. All House members who wish to retain their seat must stand for election every 2 years. Senate seats are divided into 3 groups. Every 2 years, about 1/3 of Senate seats are up for election.
Yep.
Now here's something pretty interesting. The legislative branch is responsible for creating legislation and creating laws, but they really don't have any power to make sure those laws are followed. That falls on the executive branch. And all spending bills, so if they're going to spend money, budgets, things of that nature, they're required to start in the House. Is that a lizard? I'm getting sidetracked here. No, that's fine. I just my African fat-tailed gecko named Twitch, and she was a real interesting thing, and she lived forever. It seemed like way longer than she should have. In the beginning, as part of the separation of powers, they even separated up the House and Senate as far as how they were elected. The House was elected by popular vote. So everybody in the state voted on their representative in whatever district they were in, but it was popular vote. Before the 17th Amendment, the Senate was voted on by the state legislature. So the people didn't actually vote on them. And then after 17th Amendment, that was changed into a popular vote. I'm not a real fan. The 17th Amendment is one of those I'm not a real fan of, just because I think that pulled power away from the states, because they were trying to divide, and as we know, the president is elected by the Electoral College, and they divided that up between popular vote, the state vote, and then the Electoral College to make sure there was a separation. And I think they kind of, when they took it away from the states, I think they took away from some state power. But, that's just my opinion.
Originally, senators were chosen by state legislatures, but they have been elected by statewide popular vote since ratification of the 17th Amendment in 1913. Article 2 of the Constitution outlines the terms of office and the powers of the President of the United States. The President serves for 4 years and may be reelected. Under the 22nd Amendment, ratified in 1951, a person may serve only 2 terms as President. Anyone who succeeds to the presidency to fill a vacancy and serves more than 2 years can only be elected to 1 additional term. To be elected president, a person must be 35 years old, be a natural-born citizen of the United States, and have lived in the United States for 14 years. The framers established an electoral college to select the president and the vice president. The vice president's only specified duty is to serve as the presiding officer of the Senate.
Okay, so let's talk about the executive branch real quick. Where'd it go? Go back. There we go. Like he said, they served 2 4-year terms, and they changed that. They amended that in the Constitution in 1951. Before that, FDR, he was actually elected for 4 terms, and he served 12 years and some change. I don't remember exactly how long. I think it was 2 or 3 months into his 4th term he passed away, or he would have served for a full 16 years. And then they started thinking, well, that gives if you can reelect the same guy over and over and over again every 4 years, they figured he was gaining too much power and would become a king, which they offered that to George Washington, the first president. They said, hey, do you want to be a king? And he was like, no, I'm good. But he was that guy they would have made king. And despite all this. And then if you look here, he said something about if you serve more than 2 years of someone else's term, then you can only be served for 1 term. So let's use President Biden as an example. If something happened to Biden, and Kamala Harris would automatically move up and be president, since she would be serving for more than 2 years, she could only be reelected for 1 more term. Now, if after the 2-year mark something happens to him, she could do the remaining of his and then be reelected twice. So theoretically, if the timing is right, you could be president for 10 years.
Oh, wow.
So, but that's a very specific case. And then the vice president, besides being the next guy in charge, or lady in charge in this matter, president, you preside as president over the Senate, and really the only job they had was to break a tie if there was a tie in the Senate. And not like we do it now. When they first started electing the president, the vice president was they would, everybody would run for president, and then the person with the second most votes would be the vice president. So you could have someone from a different party. You would usually have someone as vice president. So, and then that's been changed over time too. I don't know. That might have been a better system, and but we're kind of ingrained in the 2-party system now, and I don't think we're ever going to get out of it.
The framers established an electoral college to select the president and the vice president. The vice president's only specified duty is to serve as the presiding officer of the Senate. Article 3 discusses the judicial branch. The Constitution created 1 Supreme Court and gave Congress the power to create other inferior or lower courts. The number of justices on the Supreme Court is not set by the Constitution, but established by law. While the number of justices has been set at 9 since the post-Civil War era, the first Supreme Court had only 6 members. The Constitution provides that members of the federal judiciary shall serve for life during good behavior. Article 3, Section 4 allows for the impeachment and removal from office of federal judges.
Once again, the judiciary, the Supreme Court, they serve for life. So, and what happens there is the president nominates someone, and then the Senate has to confirm them. And so you'll have a open vote in the Senate, and it won't be confirmed. And the Senate even has a choice not to take it up. That happened during the last year of Obama's presidency. He put Merrick Garland, who happens to be the Attorney General now, up for a Supreme Court position. But there was a Republican Senate, and they decided that they weren't even going to give him a vote. And so they control a lot of power there. But if the legislature creates the laws, the executive branch, which is the president, executes the laws and makes sure they're followed. The biggest job of the Supreme Court is to make sure those laws are compatible with the Constitution. So they have final say on whether a law is constitutional. And we just saw when they overturned Roe versus Wade.
Yep.
They decided that was a bad thing. Um, and that's not the first time, you know, you hear a lot of things, but they've overturned decisions all the time. One of them was the Dred Scott decision, which was a terrible, terrible thing. It said black people could not be, they decided that black people could not be citizens of the United States. That way they could keep them from voting, right?
Yep.
Post Civil War. So, and so they're not fallible by any means. They still make bad decisions. And like I said, they serve for life. And just like the president, if you want to get rid of a Supreme Court justice, if you want him out of the Supreme Court, him or her, they have to be have to go through impeachment proceedings. The House has to go in, and then the Senate has to decide to kick them out. So even if you're impeached by the House, like President Trump was twice, if the Senate refuses to take action and kick them out of office, then the impeachment pretty much means nothing except for something on paper.
Article 4 addresses relations among the states and other state-related issues. The article stipulates that one state is to provide another full faith and credit, which means that the laws and judicial proceedings of one state be honored by other states. Citizens of one state cannot be denied the privileges and immunities of citizens of another state, and that those accused or convicted of crime in one state should be delivered to that state should they flee to another.
All right, so each state will honor laws and judicial proceedings of other states. And that can be something as simple as a driver's license. You know, because if you didn't have Article 4 and you had an Oklahoma driver's license, they could have made it illegal to drive in Texas or New Mexico, right? So they're like, okay, you know, if you have a driver's license in one state, you can drive everywhere. Just simple things like that. And you know, if you're commit a crime in, you know, Oklahoma and you run off to to ship you back to Oklahoma to stand trial, things like that, so you can't hide out in another state. These days it's almost impossible to hide out anyway, given, you know, computer databases and such. But you know, back in the old days, you know, people would get in trouble in one state, you know, they would bail to another state, you know, because they didn't have effective means of communicating this person is wanted. So technology has done a thing, and that actually happened to me one time. I got a ticket in North Carolina years and years and years and years ago that I'd never paid. It was like a speeding ticket or something. And we went to Oklahoma. I got my Oklahoma's driver's license. It was fine. And then 4 years later, when I were doing my driver's license, they wouldn't renew it for me because somehow in the database it finally caught up with me, and I still had an outstanding ticket in North Carolina. So I had to call a lawyer, send him a check. He got it taken care of, and then I could finally get my license. So that, you know, the states, you know, move like that, and it was very inconvenient. So pay your stupid speeding tickets. Gosh.
That state should they flee to another. Article 5 describes the process of amending the Constitution. Hoping that the Constitution would endure for many years, the framers did not want to make the process of amending it too easy. Although there are several ways to amend the Constitution, all but one constitutional amendment has been passed by a 2/3 vote in each chamber of Congress, followed by ratification by legislatures in 3/4 of the states. Article 6 of the Constitution contains the Supremacy Clause. It states that the U.S. Constitution and federal law take precedent over state constitutions and state law. The Supremacy Clause ensures that states cannot interfere with the constitutional powers of the federal government or take over any functions that are specifically assigned to the federal government.
All right, once again, Article 6, Supremacy Clause. Now, we have to remember what was intended in the Constitution. The Constitution does not give us rights. Okay, they state specifically that our natural rights are given to us just because we're born. And they talk about natural rights given to you by your creator, so a higher power, God, if you will, whatever, the flying spaghetti monster or whatever you decide to worship at the time. Those rights cannot, if they're not given by the government, cannot be taken away by the government. And that was very specific to the founders, because they didn't want you to feel like your rights were given to you by the government, because what they can give, they can take away. And so we're talking about there's the First Amendment of the Constitution. You have 5 parts to it: freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom to assemble, freedom to redress your government grievances, and which one am I missing? Anybody know? Freedom of the press. And those rights cannot be taken away. Okay. Now, we do have limits on things like freedom of speech. You can't incite people to violence. You can make that illegal, but you can, so you can say pretty much whatever you want. In fact, the Supreme Court just decided, and I don't remember which state it was, that if you have laws against panhandling in your city or state, that is a restriction on freedom of speech. So panhandling laws are unconstitutional because they can't stop you from asking people for money. Freedom of speech. That's the same reason why you can take a cop and you can cuss him up and down, and there's not a thing he can do about it. Okay, especially as a government agent, because, like I said, the Constitution was meant to limit the federal government and put it in a box, and then anything outside of that, the states and the people, prospectively, have the power for. And that's a big deal. And I'll go into something else here in a minute. I don't want to.
Specifically assigned to the federal government. Article 7 provides that only 9 states were needed to ratify the new Constitution and put the new government into effect. The framers debated whether to allow state legislatures to ratify the Constitution or to require specially elected conventions. They decided on the latter, out of a belief that endorsement by bodies chosen by the people expressly for the purpose of ratifying the document would have more weight.
The founders were much wiser than we were. And these guys, we're talking guys like Ben Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams. These guys were giants of their time. You never heard the term we were standing on the shoulders of giants. These are the guys. Yep. And they had to make real considered decisions. And first one was they had to make a devil's bargain when it came to slavery. They put in the potential to get rid of slavery in the Constitution. All men are created equal. And we're not talking about equity, we're not talking about equal outcome, but we're talking about equality under the law, that I'm treated the same as Janessa or as Elise or as, anyone else. But at that time, slavery was legal, and it had been, it was legal. It had been in our civilization for thousands of years. Now, only later, after they gained the technology to build these large ships and go get people from Africa and bring over the United States as slaves, for the most part, for thousands of years before that, slaves and the slavers looked exactly alike. Okay. Yep. Chinese had Chinese slaves, African had African slaves, Native people had Native slaves, and so on and so forth. Europeans had, white slaves that they'd captured in battle from other countries. In fact, the word slave comes from, the term Slavic. And then later, it became a racial issue in America because they were able to go across the water and grab people and bring them over instead of, enslaving their own people. But there was still we'll call it a semi-slavery, which was indentured servitude. So if you were white, you may not be a slave, but they had you locked down in indentured servitude, and it would make it so hard to get out of that you were just a slave anyway. They would give you an opportunity to buy your way out of it, but it was something that you would never be able to achieve because they found ways you couldn't do that. The kind of way they treated the freed slaves when they were sharecroppers. Yes, they were no longer slaves, but they had them stuck as sharecroppers, and they had means to do that. They would charge them for the seed, charge them for the equipment, charge them rent on the land, and so these people would work the land and toil tirelessly and practically kill themselves to bring in a crop. And then at the end of the day, when it was all sold and they paid off their bills, they were usually still in debt. So there was no way they could give it. So it was a really, really, really nasty way of doing things. So finally, we came up with the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. And the 13th Amendment was the one that banned slavery and all involuntary servitude. And they had an exception for punishing for a crime. The 14th Amendment defined U.S. citizens as any person born or naturalized in the United States. So that was Dred Scott. Remember when they said, black people couldn't, we freed you, but you can't be citizens. Well, the 14th Amendment overturned that, which, was only fair. But people didn't want to give up on what they had. And then the 15th Amendment, they can't deny you the right to vote based on race, color, whether you used to be a slave or an indentured servitude. And then we moved on to the Civil Rights Act, which covered gender and religion and things of that nature. So make sure one man, one vote. We don't have any more of that 3/5 stuff. But we also got to remember that the 3/5 compromise was designed to keep people of color from being full citizens out of malice. It was actually the slavery abolitionists that wanted to count slaves at 3/5 of a person. So if they would have counted them as a full person, then the South would have had way more votes, because then the slave owner could use those votes they could use as a slave to just push their way into it. So the abolitionists said, okay, we'll call them 3/5 of the person. Once again, another devil's bargain, right? It wasn't right, but it's the best they could do at the time. And then we ended up fighting the Civil War, and going through, Jim Crow, the Civil Rights Movement. I mean, a Civil Rights Movement, LBJ didn't sign that into law till the Civil Rights Act till 1967, or is it 65? Anyway, go ahead. Oh, I didn't hear you. Let me look it up. We can just look it up. I'm not real good with dates.
64.
64. Okay. And so, okay. I guess I was off. And so that wasn't that long ago, guys. Some of us people who are not young anymore, I started kindergarten in 1976. So it had only been 12 years since the Civil Rights Act had been signed into law. My mom, I think she was freshman in high school, maybe, or maybe even 8th grade when they integrated schools. So this was, this is still fairly new on a historical level. And then, but we finally worked it all out, I think, hopefully. And then I think that is, I'm trying to think if there's anything else I'm really excited to cover about that, because I think I need to cut it off so we can get actually to some business communications. Any questions,
actually,
comments?
Clarence Thomas said that he would like to revisit Brown versus Education.
He
Why the
did.
hell he would want to do that, I don't know.
He believes in, I love Clarence Thomas. I really do. I think
Oh, I
he
don't.
is, yeah, a lot of people don't. I'm a huge Clarence Thomas fan. He believes that the decision was made correctly, but the decision was right, but it was made for the wrong reasons. And so he wants to go and revisit these things, and he wants them done correctly. And that's why they, like I said, they overturned Roe versus Wade. Whether you agree or not, they decided, it was unconstitutional for the federal government to be involved in that, and they gave that power back to the states. Now, of course, it causes a lot of friction, whether you side on pro-life or pro-choice. They wanted to give power back, and it's very rarely that a government will push power back to the people.
The way his
And so and I won't get too involved in it. And there was another decision Clarence Thomas wanted to look at too, and I don't remember when it was. Gosh, I don't remember, and I just read about it a few days ago.
Interracial marriage.
Interracial
No,
marriage. No?
He hasn't come up against Loving. It's
Clarence Thomas. Clarence Thomas would not be against interracial marriage because he happens to be, his wife happens to be
White.
super white. Yeah, I think she's almost transparent. Can't say that. So, you're right, Janessa. I don't want to
she's
break
going
you.
to get him disbarred.
Well, see, and that's the thing. I don't think they really can't stand on holding him responsible for what his wife does. She is a independent citizen of her own. They try to, and they did a lot of. I don't think it was underhanded the way they did Clarence Thomas, but this was, once again, my personal opinion. I'm a big fan of Clarence Thomas, Scalia.
Oh, me,
And,
not me. Anita Hill all the way. I firmly believed her.
You really? Okay.
I did.
I can't.
I know. It's all right.
I feel like they were almost trying to Kavanaugh him, because if you notice, when they finally confirmed Kavanaugh, all those accusations went away.
Oh no,
so
they've come up a couple more times, but they've died a quick
yeah.
death.
because but this is politics. Politics is dirty. It's like getting down in the mud, bare knuckle brawling in the mud, and it can get ugly.
Kavanaugh, Brown, and somebody else lied under oath when they said that they would not overturn Roe v. Wade.
Once again, they
lied.
I don't think they lied, because I can't. It'll blow up in my face, and then I'll end up getting fired.
Yeah.
But and like I said, I do think Roe versus Wade was a very questionable decision when they did it. I think most things should be left up to the states. The Constitution was meant, like I said, to put the federal government in a box so it wouldn't become overly powerful and too invasive in our lives. And even given that, the federal government is everywhere in our lives right now. And we have to consider the repercussions of that, because we find that these strong central governments that kind of rule on high. Nice, Violet. that they don't really work. Okay. And especially in United States, which is we have such a large geographic area. We're so diverse, race, religion. I mean, you find everything here. And you don't find that in most countries. You don't find the kind of racial and religious and belief diversity that you find here. Now, if you go to Norway, it's mostly white. You go to Nigeria, it's mostly black. You go to China, it's all Chinese except for a few people, right? There's really not a whole lot of diversity there. So we happen to just be that proverbial melting pot, and it comes with its own problems as well.
Sure
So,
does.
but I think I'd rather be here than most places.
Yep.
Okay, so I want to know how the right to privacy is going to affect HIPAA, because I think it will.
Well, and see, that was part of the deal is they created the right to privacy out of whole cloth. And it was kind of questionable the way they did it. But I also think that things like HIPAA, that the government can create laws to put barriers in place to make sure your privacy is respected, like HIPAA. One, I don't deal in HIPAA,
Share that.
but we're talking about we deal with FERPA, which is very similar, which is keeping your education information as private as possible. So, and you'll find that my wife, who works in financial aid, deals with that. A parent will call and say, "Hey, I need to talk about my child's grade, or the financial aid." If the student has not signed a release, then and the parents will say, "Well, I write the check for this." Well, you might write the check, but you don't have a right to their private information, and they get pretty upset. But that's the right to privacy, I think, is very important. I think it's really connected to the Fourth Amendment. Be securing your personal property and effects. But like I said, that's one of those constitutional things that we're going to have to work out. Because where does privacy begin and end? Because many things aren't private. Get arrested. It'll be in the newspaper next week, right?
Yep.
So, or get a speeding ticket. It'll be in the she got a nope rope.
Yes. No, that was my professor. This is Hella. Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you.
Yeah, you're well, I'll be good as long as it's not a spider. So, yeah, there's a lot of things that are public record. Divorce documents. If you're a government employee, your salary. My wife's salary, you can go on the website and look it up. So, like I said, that's kind of one of those weird things that what are we going to do? You want to protect privacy. You want people to have equality under the law, and but what does that really mean sometimes? And that's why we have the Supreme Court making these decisions. And although they're not infallible, they're what we have, and we have to work within that structure. Just like our legislators aren't infallible, and just like our president, because the president is the living embodiment of the executive branch. Okay. And just like we have this thing with Trump where they're talking about declassifying documents and whatnot. Well, and I've had people argued with me saying, "Hey, well, he didn't go through the process of declassifying documents." He doesn't have a process. Any president can wave his hands like a magic wand over documents and say declassified. That's it. It's done.
Nope.
He has plenary power over declassifying documents, and no, the legislature or any agency in the executive branch can place rules on him over that. Ellie said, "Nope."
No, he cannot. Otherwise, that would have been happening all along. This
it
is the only
does.
president that we have had this happen.
If you notice, remember he shared,
Nuclear codes
he
with,
didn't share nuclear codes. He shared
Yes, he
he
did.
shared some information with Russia, and like I said, I'm gonna disagree. And like I said, that his very action, he didn't have to say it. He can take his very action can declassify something just by doing it. He
Yep.
has plenary power. He is the executive branch. He decides what's classified and what's declassified. In the end, he has a say so, nobody else. And
we are gonna way disagree on that one.
and I'm not just talking about Trump. Biden has the same power. So did Obama. So did Bush. All the way back to the other Bush, Reagan, Clinton. They all had that same power. So I'm not just saying, because it's Trump. I'm saying Biden right now could wave his hand over some documents and go, poof, you're declassified, and there's not really anything anybody can do about it.
Yeah,
And that's just like, and that's why they call it plenary power. That's just like the border security. If you remember, Arizona lost a case on border security a few years ago because that is one of the constitutional powers of the federal government, and states can't interfere with that. Okay, no matter how
Yep.
much they want to, so there are certain things. And like I said, Elise and I will disagree, but hopefully we'll agree. No, I didn't say the A word. I said Elise, not name faceless lady. She was
that's great.
blowing on me. But hopefully we'll disagree in a civil matter, and she won't hunt me down and chop off an ear or something.
Nope.
And that's the beautiful thing, is we all get to disagree and we all get to express our opinions. There are still many places that you don't get to do that, and places like China or Venezuela, Cuba. Trying to think of some of the countries that are really, really bad. And if you speak out against the
Russia.
government, Russia, yeah, and
I
if you speak out against the government, you may just disappear
Yep.
and never be heard from again. So I'm really thankful for our constitutional requirements, because I have a big mouth, and if I was Chinese, they'd already got rid of me. So all right, man, we almost took up the whole class on that. I apologize. Let me back up here on anything over the last 3 weeks in business communications, because if not, I'll try to get a little bit done here. And I do apologize. It was not supposed to take that long, ladies. But I will blame it on Elise.
I can take it.
Well, we're still friends, Elise, I promise. Hopefully.
That's good. I'm good.
Okay, so let's go about talk about business. Did anybody have any questions, Sandy? Okay, well, we'll talk about business presentations, and we'll see if we can get to this. And of course, this is done on PowerPoint, and we know I do PowerPoint here, and I hate PowerPoint slides, but sometimes it's just a necessity. Yeah, I hate using them, I hate making them, but right, that's what we have, and then the most efficient thing we have to try to get this information across when we're presenting to a large group of people. Okay, we can look here at the learning outcomes. Since we're running low on short on time, we'll just kind of run through. We'll just go ahead and just keep going. Okay, business presentation. English is hard. Business presentations are a means of exchanging information for decision making and policy development. When I first got hired 5 years ago at CCC, it was kind of funny. They give you a first interview, and if they like you, you had to come in for a second interview, And the second interview was you'd have the president of the university, the CFO. There's about a dozen people in there, and you had to give a presentation, and you had to teach them something. And then you'd have a third interview, usually with HR department head, decide if they really do. So, you know, knowing this comes in handy. We don't have to like it to be good at it and know it serves a purpose. Okay, so you have oral briefings. We use the word verbal instead. Verbal briefings. They're informal presentations prepared and presented with little time for planning and developing. Brief update on a project requested during a meeting and could be requested impromptu. So we're having a meeting, we're sitting around, and they're going to go around and ask questions, opinions, and do that kind of stuff. A lot of meetings are like that. You may have an itinerary or an agenda, but you know, you're going to have open discussions based on that. And then, like some places, my poor wife likes it. Since she meetings to talk about the next meeting, and then they'll have after that meeting, they'll have another meeting to discuss what they had in the other meeting. Deborah's like, it is insane. And I was like, what'd you do today? She's like, I spent my whole day in meetings. I said, what'd you do? She said, they were absolutely useless.
It probably could have been an email.
That's exactly what she says. But once again, government, large corporations, when you start scaling this stuff out, it's inefficient, you know. And I know I pick on government, like the state and federal government, a lot because that's kind of the low hanging fruit. But I've worked for very, very large companies too, and they're kind of the same way, you know. Meetings upon meetings upon meetings to talk. You know, you have a meeting to plan the next meeting, and then you have that next meeting, and then you have the third meeting to talk about what you did in the other meeting, and then to plan the meeting after that to talk about that meeting. You know, why? When it could have been an email or a 5-minute conversation with somebody.
Yep.
So, but when you're doing these presentations, you want to know what you have to know what you want to accomplish. So you have to have a purpose. And so, you know, you just go in there, you know, unprepared and just shooting from the hip. Okay, the author of the book Do's and Taboos of Public Speaking provides mechanisms for condensing a presentation to achieve the purpose. One of the most, and I think we've seen his videos, one of the most effective public speakers I've ever seen is Dr. Jordan Peterson. Whether you like him or dislike him and his content, his public speaking skills are usually second to none. And so I don't use him as an example of what you should believe or don't believe, but just watch how he presents his information, does his public speaking, engages with the audience. You know, he does all the right things there. So when he talks about providing mechanisms for condensing a presentation to achievable purpose, we talk about develop a phrase as a thought that the audience needs to take with them from the presentation. Now, that's one thing Jordan Peterson doesn't do well. He drifts off a lot. I think that's why I feel like a kindred spirit with him sometimes, because, you know, I have a tendency to just kind of move into other things and tell stories. Audience should be in a position to describe the central purpose of the presentation. So when you're done, they know what your purpose was. They know what you were trying to convey, and they know what you told them. If you've ever been, you know, had someone speaking, and you've been to whatever it was, and when in the end you're going, I don't even know what they were trying to do. What are they talking about? And so that's just, you know, it's just being ineffective at that. Oops. Hey, know your audience. Know your audience. During the Constitution discussion, I did not know my audience, and Lee surprised me. which was super cool, and I actually enjoyed it immensely. But yeah, know your audience, know who you're speaking to, and because when you have a purpose, you're not going to speak to financial professionals the same way you're going to speak to a bunch of plumbers or a bunch of teachers, or so know who
Yep.
you're speaking to and be able to speak their language. Because let's say I'm talking to a bunch of salesmen, and I'm throwing out jargon about finances and economics that they have no idea what I'm talking about. I have to speak their language. I need to speak salesman language. Okay. And if I'm talking to a bunch of bankers, many times you can't speak salesman language, because they're going to be, they're not going to know the terms, the terminology, since you would have been doodling.
Mhm.
So who's the audience and who requested the presentation? Why is the topic important? And what will they do with the information? And what environmental factors affect the presentation? So, how big is the venue? Can they hear you? Can they see you? Are they engaged? Is it too hot? Is it too cold? All these things. Who wants to sit around and listen to some guy speak when it's 100 degrees it's like going to a kid's graduation when it's 110 degrees in the gym. You're like, man, just give these kids their diploma and get them the heck out of here. So, all these things can affect whether or not you're going to get your message across. And remember, we talked about before, you have a sender and a receiver. Violet says she hates speaking in front of people. That
Sure do.
some people it becomes natural, but they're the minority. But it is a learned skill, and you become more confident as you go along. I've spoken, I can speak to what we have here, 3, 6, 9, 12, 11 people. I can speak to a crowd of 25, and I've spoken in front of a crowd of 6,000 before. And
Nope.
I learned very quickly that there's really no difference between speaking to 11 than there are 6,000. Okay. The process remains the same. It's only the size of your audience. And I will tell you, okay, they say picture, what was one of the things, to picture people naked in the audience. Don't do that. Just don't do that. Bad idea. So Violet, just to your point, it's not that bad. I promise. It's just a learned skill, and you, even though you hate it, can become good at it. My wife, who's my opposite, of course, is very introverted, and she's learned to go in front of 100 people and give a speech. She really doesn't like it, but she's very comfortable doing it, and she's just learned that skill. It's like any other skill you may learn. It takes time and it takes practice. Like, I think Janessa, what are you doing, crocheting?
No, I was putting beads on a necklace.
Well, I saw you down here. It looked like, my wife, she crochets. I was like, just like any other skill, crocheting, you're not going to be good the first time. The first time you make a hat is not going to look the same as the 25th time you make a hat. So, it just developing that skill. And it is 8:30 and I have burned all your time. So let me go ahead and stop the share, and I will stop the recording. And as everybody knows, the recording means class is over. You are more than